Italy is going through what's probably one of its worst economic crises in history. From massive brain drains to millions of empty houses to its aging problem has the entire continent concerned. But with a history of epic comebacks and unprecedented economic growth after similar crises, is Italy getting ready for yet another economic miracle? Stay tuned to the very end to find out. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing so you don't miss any future videos like this. While it used to be limited to remote mountain towns, it is now a common theme throughout Italy. There are millions of empty homes throughout the country and in communities of all sizes, and the number grows by the year. Many of them are captivating historical mansions located in some of the most beautiful areas of the Italian countryside, and they are literally part of Italy's cultural legacy. And to preserve them, communities throughout Italy have launched so-called €1 projects. As a result, the state has one less crumbling house to worry about, and you get a house practically for free. But there's a catch. Since these houses have been abandoned for such a long time, the buyers are required to renovate them, which typically costs around 20 to 30,000 euros. That's still not that much considering the property. Now the real question is why there are so many empty houses in Italy. To explain why there are so many empty houses, we need to explain something else first, and that's the fact that Italy has been facing two major crises for quite some time now and completely failing to deal with either of them. The first crisis is the fact that since the mid-2000s, the Italian economy has basically stopped growing and has been stagnant ever since. Looking back in time, we can see that multiple economic slowdowns have occurred countless times in Italy. For Italy, the stagnation was surely difficult, but by imposing some necessary changes, it emerged as one of the fastest-growing economies, not only in the world, but in history. Each period of stagnation was followed by a period of extraordinary expansion. In the 1980s, Italy's economy was stagnating. They nearly tripled their economic production in just 7 years. The same occurred following World War II. The battle had severely wrecked Italy's economy, sending it backward. But they recreated themselves and saw decades of steady growth. Today, in 2024, Italy is once again facing another economic stagnation. But the question is, can the Eurozone's third largest economy make a comeback? Well, historical trends say that it's already overdue, but this time around it's a little more complicated, as Italy faces newer challenges as well as the ones from its past. Italy currently has a significant governmental debt, and many of its workers will retire in the coming years, so there needs to be more young individuals to replace them. Not to mention, their enterprises are small, they've invested very little in technology, and Italy is one of the biggest black markets in the world. However, with a history of making theatrical comebacks, can Italy do it once again? Italy's location is ideal for success. The country is sheltered by mountains to the north and has easy access to the Mediterranean from all sides. But that's not what's most attractive about Italy. Tourists are increasingly drawn to Italy's picturesque cities, a sector that accounts for around 10% of their GDP. However, geography can help explain why these cities are where they are. Take Venice, for example. It's ideally placed at the head of the Adriatic Sea, on a river in a flat plain surrounded by high mountains. This topography rendered them nearly impenetrable, allowing them to thrive as a commercial hub between Asia, Africa, and Western Europe. Until the 19th century, the Italian peninsula was divided among local republics and city-states, which eventually merged into the Kingdom of Italy. Following World War II, they established themselves as a republic, and Italy took on nearly its current form. This is where the story of Italy's modern economy begins. Following World War II, the Italian economy was left in shambles and practically backward. Its society was fractured, and all signs pointed towards another civil war, something that had plagued the region in the past. Not only that, Italy's per capita income had dropped to its lowest level since the early 20th century, and the country's economy remained rudimentary. However, from 1951 to 1963, its economy grew at an average annual rate of 5.8%. Then, until 1973, it rose at a 5% annual rate. This feat is now known as the Italian economic miracle. During this time, the United States provided Italy with billions of euros in help through the Marshall Plan, as the US saw Italy as a fragile new democracy on the verge of the Iron Curtain. The new Cold War logic positioned them as a crucial partner in the struggle against communism. But That's also when the Korean War started, something that will push Italy to become a global superpower. Italian entrepreneurs contributed metal and manufactured goods to the Korean War effort, assisting the Italian economy in furthering its growth and industrialization. In the aftermath of the Korean War, Italy evolved from a primarily rural nation with a shattered economy into a global industrial power. However, even that was short-lived, as issues occurred in the 1970s and economic growth ceased entirely in the decade that followed. Unemployment was high, and many youngsters ages 24 and under were unemployed. There was also severe inflation, exacerbated by the worldwide oil crisis. As a result, Italy's government ran a budget deficit of 10% of GDP, the biggest among developed countries worldwide. All of these problems caused the lira, the Italian currency at the time, to lose around 70% of its value in just 10 years. This made it extremely difficult to attract international investment. But it's Italy we're talking about. After 5 years of no or negative growth, the economy unexpectedly soared. By 1992, they had almost tripled their economic production. The media labeled this as the second Italian economic miracle. So, how did they pull this off? Well, one thing they did very effectively was battle inflation. In 1980, inflation was soaring at 20.6%, and by 1987 it had dropped to just 4.7%. And this was achieved mostly by reducing wage indexation. Now, I know what you're asking, what's that? Well, let me explain in the simplest possible terms. When inflation is really high, workers demand higher prices, and corporations must raise their products to match up, resulting in further inflation. This is known as the wage price spiral, and it is one of the most destructive processes in economics. To break this cycle, wages were drastically decreased, which eventually led to lower inflation. Italy was not the only country that had such rapid growth in the late 1980s. It was happening to some extent throughout the world. Italian entrepreneurs created new firms producing apparel, leather items, shoes, furniture, and machine tools. During this time, Italy established itself as a manufacturer of highly skilled crafts, and they had a strong reputation. As a result, today if a product has to be labeled "Made in Italy," consumers are willing to spend extra. This reputation is a huge advantage that only a few countries in the world have. But it all came crumbling down again in the 1990s. For context, in 1992, they had a larger economy than in 2002. So what happened here? During the 1990s economic boom, the government cut taxes while increasing spending, which resulted in the national debt increasing exponentially. But still, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is a common method for countries to build their economies through debt, but Italy may have gone a little too far. Not to mention, the black market in Italy is massive. The Italian Senate estimates that they lose over €132 billion in tax income each year, which is roughly the size of Hungary's entire GDP. Now, when you hear the word black market, you think about mobsters and criminals, but the reality is quite different. The majority of tax evasion is committed by average employees who take their salaries in cash, informal enterprises, and small businesses that simply do not pay. So Italy's national debt was piling up, and they had little or no authority over who was paying their taxes, which was problematic because they wanted to join the Eurozone. And Italy's entry into the Eurozone was contingent on reducing its national debt. So Italy cut spending, raised taxes, and as you can see from the graph, they were extremely efficient in reducing the public debt. However, in the 1990s, there was already a global recession. There was also considerable inflation. And all of this contributed to Italy's poor economic performance in the 1990s. However, this was followed by a period of expansion in the early 2000s. And all of this contributed to Italy's poor economic performance in the 1990s. However, this was followed by a period of expansion in the early 2000s. One key reason for this accomplishment was that it occurred all around the world. It also helped because Italy had accepted the euro. This drew more international investment because the previous currency, the lira, was notoriously unstable. That, of course, came crashing down in 2008, and Italy is still dealing with the aftermath. Today, Italy's unemployment rate is around 7%, significantly higher than the European Union average of 6%. And looking at historical unemployment statistics, we can see that this is a significant improvement. One of Italy's greatest challenges today is its aging workforce. 24% of the population is 65 or older, with many more preparing to retire. Meanwhile, many young, educated Italians are migrating to nations with greater earnings. There is also a significant split between the north and south. For example, the province of Lombardy in the north now has a GDP per capita equal to 127% of the EU average, while Calabria in the south only has 56%. In 2008, the north had an average salary of slightly more than €30,000, while the south had around €26,000. The north-south difference is also seen in Italy's employment, life expectancy, education, and voting patterns. Now, Italian brands continue to enjoy a strong global reputation, but they are becoming less productive. They haven't spent as much on technology, therefore they're getting outcompeted. In 2022, Giorgia Meloni won the Italian general elections, and her government is extremely conservative and far-right. She inherited an economy that had improved slightly during the pandemic, but was already displaying signs of slowing growth. Italy has the second greatest public debt in the EU, and they pay hefty interest rates on what they owe. But Meloni's strategy calls for lower taxes and higher spending. Her hopes for rebuilding the economy rely heavily on EU subsidies, but they have failed to meet the policy standards for spending these funds. In the end, Italy is simply struggling with a lot of challenges, a massive brain drain, and massive abandoned properties that the government needs to deal with. But what do you think? Will Italy make another historic comeback, or has the country left its best days behind? Let us know.